Chapter 2. As the eye of the day fanned its light through the jungle branches, Kabu stirred and opened his eyes. For a few minutes he lay motionless. Momentarily he forgot the horrors that had brought him to rest in a hollow tree. Then the events crowded back, the whippings, the time in the stock, and the voice saying to him, "Flee! Flee!" Finally he remembered his escape through the forest. He crawled out of the hollow tree and fell back on the ground. With another great effort, Kabu pulled himself upright. His throat felt dry and thirsty, and his limbs were stiff and sore. His thirst drove him toward the sound of running water, and when he discovered a pool of fresh water, he ran to its edge, plunged his face into the water, and drank deeply. He let the water slowly run down his swollen throat. It brought new life to Kabu. He sighed, "I must find food." But for the moment he lay at the water's edge, content to know that he was safe from the Grebos. The Grebos. Am I really safe? Would a warrior find me in this quiet space? He wondered. I must hurry as far away as possible. I must keep close watch for warriors. Instantly Kabu was wide awake and alert. He plucked a lime from a nearby tree and rubbed it into his wounds. The lime juice smarted, but soon the swelling was gone. Kabu had fled so quickly that he didn't know in which direction to walk. He decided to follow the stream. It was easier to jump from rock to rock than to fight the fierce brush, which scratched and tore his flesh. As he passed overhanging berry bushes, he grasped a handful of berries. Once he lifted a rock and gathered a handful of grubs. He liked them better fried on hot stones, but he was in a hurry. At first the prince stopped throughout the day to listen for approaching warriors. As the day wore on, he grew more reckless. I don't know where I'm going, but I'm glad for the good space between me and the Grebos, he thought. He began to feel safer. He walked rapidly. To leap from one flat stone to another was easy for him, and somehow he felt pulled onward. Each step brought feelings of freedom and safety. As he almost reached a turn in the stream, he heard voices. Quickly, Kabu hid in the bushes beside the shallow stream. He peered around the corner and saw men watering their oxen. Holding his breath much of the time, he waited. They are not Grebos, but they might take me back for a reward. I must be careful, Kabu reminded himself. After the men left, Kabu hurried past the watering hole. He watched carefully as the alligators slithered back to their favorite rocks. The farther he walked along the stream, he soon realized the deeper it was becoming. The rocks were growing fewer and the alligators more numerous. Here the banks were sandy, however, and he raced across the sand until he came to an overgrowth that forced him back into the stream. Sometimes Kabu had to swim around the jungle growth, but he preferred to jump from rock to rock. He continued to spend his nights in trees and to follow the stream by day. The stream widened into a river, and Kabu kept following it. As the water increased, Kabu encountered more and more people. When he saw these people, Kabu hid. The days passed in a blur as the prince made his way through the forest. He crossed streams, forged rivers. Lush ferns grazed his arms and legs. Vines reached out with grasping arms as if to take him captive. Mangrove swamps boiled over with mud that reached up to Kabu's knees. Driver ants crossed the jungle path, a 2-inch band of fluid movement, dangerous if disturbed by a bare foot or hand. The black cobra, the puff adder, the boa hanging from the trees were each deadly enemies. The leopard, the lion, and the crocodile in the waters were all ready to strike as Kabu fled through the jungle. Not only did he want to create a huge distance between himself and the Grebos, but he was also concerned about cannibals. He had heard stories about tribes that ate their captives, and he did not want to meet up with such people. As the distance between Kabu and his enemies widened, the boy relaxed some. Lush treetops meshed to form a green ceiling over the forest. The sun filtered through the emerald green, sprinkling precious splatterings of light. Kabu lost track of time. He wondered numbly where the rivers and streams would lead him. Would he ever come to the end of his wanderings? After a few weeks, rather than hide from strangers, Kabu felt safe enough to hurry past them without speaking. No one seemed to notice him. When he was hungry, Kabu would pick wild bananas and mangoes to eat. Vines trailed like aerial ropes from high branches, and the jungle foliage was so thick in places that it shut out the sunlight. Ferns grew higher than a tall man's head. Blossoms floated on the river. Kabu caught his breath at the amazing beauty around him. Gradually the river widened and the water slowed in its rushing. Early one morning, after what seemed like endless days, Kabu heard a rooster crow. That could only mean one thing: civilization. Kabu looked to the southeast, and his heart jumped. He strained forward and saw a large wooden house painted white. He had never seen such a structure. It had round pillars that seemed to reach as high as a tree. The roof was slate and surrounded by a white fence and dozens of glass windows. The whole place was unlike anything Kabu had seen in any of the villages he was familiar with. He hurried forward, then hesitated. Who were these people? Would they know he was an escaped pawn? Would they send him back to the place of horror he had left behind? Kabu shook his head. Whoever or whatever had set him free had surely brought him this far. He had nothing to lose. Thirsty for the sight of another human being, Kabu crept toward the noises. A soft breeze carried a sound to the boy's ears, a sound he felt he had not heard for a lifetime. Music. Someone was singing. Crouching down, the young prince pulled aside the ferns that obscured his sight. Before his eyes stretched a field of coffee plants. The white flowers and red berries of the plants painted the scene with bright color. After his eyes recovered from the shocking picture, he noticed that the hillsides were covered with rows of bushes, and that men, women, and children were picking berries. How strange these people look with their heads covered with cloth, he thought. Kabu crept closer and circled the strange fields. The people are picking little dark brown fruits, a kind that I've never seen before. No one eats them, so why do they pick them and drop them in their heavy baskets? He wondered. Kabu set his sights on the one who was singing. Relief swept through the tired traveler. Coming toward Kabu was a boy about his size, who was dragging a basket. Kabu was stunned by the boy's face. He was part of the crew people. Kabu emerged shyly from the bush and crept toward the boy. It seemed sensible that he should risk being seen and seek help from this boy. Kabu was starving and nearly naked. The skin of a monkey was his only piece of clothing. Very slowly he neared the boy. He decided to show himself. Kabu stepped from the trees and called out words of greeting in his crew language. "Anuwane! Anuwane!" The boy suddenly dropped his basket and ran forward. "Prince Kabu! What are you doing here? Is it really you?" Never had Prince Kabu looked less like a prince than that day he stood in his dirty loincloth, wounded, starving, and worn out with weariness and anxiety. That anxiety lifted as he recognized the face of the boy he was facing. "Yes, it's really me, Locust. But what are you doing here?" "I'm picking coffee beans. This is a plantation of the Conjes. I work here." As though the boy was reminded through his own words, he gathered his scattered beans into his basket and continued picking. "Oh, Prince Kabu, walk beside me so we can talk. It is so good to speak in Negrite again." "What else do you speak? And who are the Conjes? I've never heard of that tribe." "They are not a tribe," Locust explained. "They were stolen from different tribes in Africa. They were sent to America as slaves, and now are returned to Liberia as free men. These people speak English and hire many tribespeople who speak various tribal languages. So in order to talk with each other, we all learned English. But what about you? Tell me about yourself." While the boy continued picking coffee beans, Kabu related his adventures and finished his tale by saying, Now I am far from the Graybos, but I don't know what to do. Locust suggested, "Why don't you ask for work here on the plantation? My boss is a good man. He will give you a job here on the plantation, food and clothes." He caught the fear in Kabu's eyes. "You are safe now, brother. I'll take you to see Mr. Davis, the owner." Prince Kabu looked at the boy with a worried frown. "Are you sure that he won't send me back to the Graybos?" "No, he wouldn't do that. He was a slave himself. Remember, I told you." Just then the bell sounded, and the workers put their baskets on their heads and walked to the weighing place. Kabu stood aside, watching the tired faces of the workers and listening to their strange sounds. Finally, everyone was gone except Locust, Kabu, and Mr. Davis. Locust approached Mr. Davis. As he pointed to Kabu, Locust explained his situation. Mr. Davis looked sharply at Kabu, who appeared forlorn and lonely. Walking to the prince, Mr. Davis took both his hands and spoke words that Kabu could not understand. But Kabu could understand the smile, the warm, firm hands, and the welcoming look in Mr. Davis's eyes. "He's asking you if you want to work on the plantation," Locust explained. Yes. Kabu's eyes widened and his teeth shone as white as the clouds. "Tell him a bird in hand is worth 100 flying. I will gladly do this for now." Mr. Davis patted Kabu on the head, motioned to Locust, and pointed to a frame bunkhouse. Kabu followed Locust to the main building. He was readily accepted and given a place to sleep in the bunkhouse. Kabu gladly pulled on his new clothes and set out to learn the ways of the coffee plantation. He felt the cycle of terror that had ruled his life had finally come to an end. Locust took Kabu by the hand. "Come on, let me show you around." The bunkhouse had boards built all around the walls. It has 6 places for beds in the middle. Everyone has their own mat and change of clothes. Every night you take a bath, put on the clean clothes, and are set for the next day. "You work every day?" "No, on Saturday we can go into town, and on Sunday we go to church. And speaking of church, I am no longer called Locust. I am Nathan Strong. When you become a Christian, you get a new Christian name." "What's a Christian?" Kabu asked. "You'll find out, Prince Kabu. It will be the happiest day of your life. Wait and see," Nathan promised as he led his friend to the dining room. The 2 young friends sat at a table where the workers chattered in English. Kabu nodded to the others, but he didn't say anything. He was still stunned at the turn his life had taken. As he adjusted to his new life, Kabu continued to wrestle with what had transpired. He marveled at the abrupt change. One day he was hanging over a cross of wood, dying. Now he was strong and busy at work, secure and safe. Over and over he thought about the voice and the light that had saved his life and brought him to the settlement. Who was it? It must have been some kind of spirit. Kabu had been taught about spirits since he was a young child, but most of those spirits were to be feared and appeased with sacrifices. This spirit was different. Kabu was hungry for answers. Kabu noticed there was something different about his new friend at the plantation. One day Kabu came into the bunkhouse and found his fellow crew kneeling on the floor. His face and hands were turned upward. He was talking to someone. "What are you doing?" asked the curious Kabu. "I am praying," replied the boy readily. "Who are you praying to?" "Why, I'm praying to God." "Who is your God?" Kabu asked, his heart pounding. The boy looked into the young prince's eyes. "He is my father." Kabu nodded. He thought it over. "Then you are talking to your father," he decided. The praying boy invited Kabu to church. "Come with me to the mission this Sunday," he urged the prince. "You'll hear more about God." Kabu attended church with his friend. He understood little of what was said, but the sense of God's presence convicted his heart. His friend explained the gospel to him. Kabu followed the lead of his friend and began to talk to his father. He prayed earnestly for answers to the aching questions in his heart. Could a poor boy like me know God? Was it God who saved me from destruction?